Here we go.
Okay. I'm very happy to welcome Elias Völker of tribe29, Director of International and Indirect Sales, as our guest today. Elias, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Sammy.
Hi. So, tell me about your company, tribe29. What are you doing?
Okay, so tribe29 is a mid-sized software company. We're currently about 80 people, and we build IT monitoring software. So we build a software that checks your IT infrastructure, typically data centers or cloud infrastructures, whether all the servers are up and running, whether the applications on these servers are up and running, and whether everything in your network, in your entire corporate IT infrastructure is doing what it should do and everything's healthy.
And what is your job at tribe29?
So as is with these fast-growing startup-y sort of companies, I wear quite a few hats, but the main hat I'm wearing is that I'm responsible for our international and indirect sales. So we sell our software both directly, so customers have a contract with us and get the software and the support from us, and indirectly via sales partners. We have somewhere about 60 sales partners across the DACH region and internationally, and those are managed by me and my team.
Can you give us a proxy of your size and growth, be it like revenue, number of customers, employees? You already said it's 80.
Yeah. So yes, I said we're about 80 people. Just for good measure, when I started about a good 2 years ago, I was, I think, number 26. So we have been growing quite rapidly. We don't officially publish our revenue numbers, so I won't mention them here. But we have about 2,500 enterprise or commercial customers, as we call them, because we're an open source company. So we have actually an order of magnitude more. We don't know the exact number, but tens of thousands of open source users. And we've been adding between 500 and 700 customers each of the last 3 years.
Who's your ideal customer?
So typically our customers are mid-sized and large corporations that run their own IT infrastructure, that have their own data centers, that have their own corporate networks, that have usually many locations, often around the world, globally. And if that's still a pretty broad statement that applies to many customers, where we're really good at is if companies are operating hybrid infrastructure. So typically a company used to have like a data center and that was their on-premises infrastructure. Today, there's such a thing as the cloud, and most corporate customers also operate parts of the infrastructure in the cloud, which creates a hybrid infrastructure. And there's very few softwares that are actually really good at monitoring both these worlds, this hybrid setup. And we are one of those who are very good at that. So a corporate customer, usually sort of enterprise size, with a hybrid IT infrastructure with parts being run on premise and parts being run in the cloud. That's pretty much a sweet spot.
And within those companies, who do you target if you could choose?
So traditionally, coming from the open source world, we've had very much a sort of bottom-up approach where we would directly target, if you could say target actively, the IT administrator, network administrators, these kind of people. This has been augmented over the last 2 years, I would say, in two directions. One is over the last few years, there's a role that has emerged, especially in these cloud and containerized infrastructures, that's called DevOps. So that sits sort of between operations, where we traditionally were very active, and development. So these people, we built quite a few tools for, but that's still very much a bottom-up approach. And I would say over the last year or half year, we have started targeting more sort of the mid-level decision maker within the company. So the IT manager, head of infrastructure, head of data center operations, these kind of. So we're not targeting CIOs or CTOs. or EVPs of these corporations, but one or two levels down, sort of the mid-sized, middle management, you could say.
The operational level, so to say.
Yes.
How many quota carrying reps we have, if you have any?
So this is something that we're shifting, or that we have shifted recently, with the setup of our team, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later. Right now we have 6 people that, well, one doesn't yet because he's still in ramp. We just hired him last month, but let's say once he is fully ramped, we would have 6 people that carry a quota. And that have, especially new revenue responsibilities.
Great. So let's jump into the inside questions here. What is your take on creating a successful sales strategy and play, Elias?
So there's one thing that I've learned sort of over the last 2 years since I've been doing this, and I'm not originally from sales, so there was a whole lot of cold water that I got thrown into, is that the approach needs to sort of fit the maturity of the overall company. So if you come into a company like ours, where 2-3 years ago, a lot of it was sort of playing by ear, and we'll figure it out as we go along, and you would come in with this super 27-step sophisticated sales process, that would just not work. The tools are not there, the people are not used to this granularity of measurement and things to look out for and so on. So something that would fit, let's say, Salesforce, or even if you would go one number smaller than Salesforce, probably wouldn't work with a company of then 30 people. But then again, the flip side of this, that your approach needs to evolve as your company grows. So we see ourselves in more and more really enterprise sales situations where where customers spend significant time and resources on selecting and then also implementing a solution, integrating with multiple other IT service management solutions. And in those situations, you can no longer sort of play it by ear. You need a structured process. You need to answer the RFP. You need, a good interaction with pre-sales engineering. So as you grow and as you become more relevant and you move up market, your sales approach needs to evolve as well to fit the new size of the company, but also the new size and demands of the customers.
So let's split it in two. Let's start with what did work well for customer acquisition, like before you ramped up from like 20 something to now 80 people.
So our strongest customer acquisition channel still today is our open source product. So we, when we onboard new customers, we always do like a little after sales survey. Obviously, not everybody answers it, but those that answer, about 50% of them say they have used the CheckMK Raw edition. That is the name of our enterprise, of our open source product in the past. Mostly actually productively, but also to evaluate our software. So that's by far and still is our strongest customer acquisition channel. And most of our customers come through those channels. It used to be basically all, and today it is still most, as far as we know. So that continues to work well and worked well when we were, 1/3 the size of what we're today.
So how do you build a freemium like go-to-market motion from like the get-go? How do you make it work, so to say?
So I don't like the term freemium because it's something different than what we have. So a good open source product is free in the sense that it's a fully fledged working product that you can use productively, and it's not sort of a bait and hook model where you give a little bit away for free where the goal of the free is actually only to upsell somebody to the premium product. So there's companies that have been using CheckMK Raw for 5-8 years in huge IT infrastructures. So, and that's great. That's good. That, you know, creates knowledge in the marketplace about a product and so on. Now, the balancing act that we need to strike from a product management perspective is have a open source product that's really good, that you can use productively also in large environments, but at the same time create enough of a sort of feature gap between the open source and the enterprise product that it's still interesting to upgrade. And there's sort of three main reasons to upgrade. One is performance. So the enterprise product is just much more performant. There's no denying that. So the second is certain features, and the third is professional support. So we don't offer professional support for our open source product. There's just an open source community that supports each other, and they do a really great job at that. But if you want, you know, have a service level agreement, these kind of things, and we've sort of worked on all three of those to be able to continue to make the Raw edition better and, you know, stay or become modern or stay modern, while at the same time still creating this differentiation to the enterprise product. And that's a balancing act that every open source company out there, you know, be it MongoDB or any others, need to strike constantly.
Like, was it a strategy from the beginning, from the founders to first build an open source, or how did it start out? Like, how do you start out with this type of sales motion?
So I believe it's definitely true for us, and I believe it's true for most open source projects. They never started out as a commercial venture. So I think it's very counterintuitive to start an open source project with a commercial goal in mind. Most open source products that I know sort of evolved into it and said, you know, there's a really great product, but there's, you know, customers, you know, take Linux, you know, there's so many open and free Linux distributions out there. But there are certain that, you know, are quite expensive, like, for example, Red Hat, and that have built a €1 billion business on the back of an open source product, because there's certain types of customers, typically enterprises, corporations, that demand certain things that you can't deliver, or that you're only able to deliver in a commercial model. And this is the same thing that sort of happened to us. So Matthias, our founder, he comes very much from the Linux world, was a Linux consultant, started then with consulting and trainings and custom development for customers. And out of this, he sort of worked on another open source monitoring system, said, well, this is really not good, or this could be better, let's put it this way. And then he built CheckMK, and then this was an open source product. At some point, there were customers that were demanding certain things, where we said, okay, we need to kind of underpin this with a commercial model. This is not something we can just, you know, do as custom development and charge, I don't know, €200 an hour, and that's that. And that's how the commercial model got started.
Very interesting. So how do you convert those? Like, I already understood, like, of course, you have to work on the product, you have to build a feature gap, and people have to want to, like, have more of your product. But how do you make them aware that they can have more? Like, how do you convert this big user base of people who use the open source for free to potentially paying customers? How do you educate them?
That's actually quite tricky, because sort of the open source ethos is that you don't collect any data. So you can download CheckMK Raw without leaving an email address. It used to be that we don't even ask for it. I think now, I haven't checked the download portal, but I think now we ask for it, but it's totally optional. So for the vast majority of Raw users, we do not even have an email address. We have no way of contacting them. We just know that they're there because we see that people from all over the world are downloading our software.
One thing you have to basically add is that it's not a software as a service, so to say. So they're not checking in on the cloud, as far as I understood. but you can download it like the good old software stuff. You buy out a disk, and then you implement it, and you don't have to
Yes.
like check in online. So that's why
Yes.
you don't know.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out, Sammy. That's exactly right. So the software, for very good reasons, is run on premise on the infrastructure of the customer. It doesn't phone home because a monitoring tool typically sort of is in the very heart of each IT infrastructure. And people are very, very nervous if a system that is at the very heart of your infrastructure has access to the outside world, because that's an access that can be exploited. And that is why many monitoring tools, not just ours, run sort of on premise. They don't phone home. They're sort of shut off from the world. And that's for good reason. So that makes it even harder. Yes, but that's with the software as a service, everything's differently because we run the software, not the customer runs it, and so on. So that's a whole different ball game. So, but back to your original question of how do you educate customers? So there's a few things you can do. Obviously, you can build features into your open source product that are just not activated if you're not on the enterprise edition. And you see, oh, I wish I could do this and this, and you look for the feature, and, oh, that's only available in the enterprise edition. Now the same is in all your content, like especially the product handbook, the documentation. You have like, okay, if you're using the CheckMK Raw edition, this is how you do it, and if you're using the CheckMK Enterprise edition, actually you could do these three things more. So that's a sort of very, you could say, passive aggressive way of sort of marketing your product. And then there's also we are very active in the CheckMK community. So we run a forum which has several thousand active users every month, where people talk about, and obviously there's raw users and there's enterprise users, and people will have problems. They if you're using the enterprise, then this would be something you could do. And in our events, in our community calls, in our user conference, and so on, obviously we also highlight the features of the enterprise product, and not only of the raw edition. We try to go with the times and make the raw edition good and keep it a very viable product, but nevertheless the really cool features are the ones that also differentiate the enterprise edition.
How do you build such a community?
I think if you try to do it, you won't manage to. It's so this, to be honest, this happened a long time before I was there. So I think there's a number of communities. There is this Linux community, which is one of the most active and best known open source communities. And CheckMK and other tools as well evolved from that Linux community. Matthias, before he started with CheckMK, was a Linux consultant, a Linux trainer. He wrote books on Linux. So he was already quite active in this community. And there's really sort of, celebrities in these communities. And probably Matthias was sort of a minor celebrity in the German-speaking Linux community. So when he came out with his own project, people noticed and they tried it out, and that's how it's probably a topic for a great research paper of how these communities evolve and what determines whether they're successful or not, because there's a ton of open source projects that never go anywhere, and there's others that just take off. And I think it's quite difficult to make it take off. There's a few things you can do to enable it. Be active, be supportive, keep your product up to date, and so on. But in the end, there's sort of critical mass building, and once that builds, it sort of fuels itself.
And how can I imagine this community? Is that where are those people meeting? Is it a Slack channel? Is it like, where is it?
So that depends from community to community. Many run sort of some kind of community platform. There's different forums, and so we run a forum which is where we try to do most of the community interaction. There's physical meetups, or once there was such a thing as physical meetups. There's like user group meetings. There's community calls, virtual community calls, where we live stream events on YouTube. Then there's physical events and virtual events, like, user conferences and these kind of things. So, but there's others, like other, some of our, there's for other open source product, there's user groups on LinkedIn, and people, exchange there. There's subreddits on Reddit. We try to offer a really good forum and have the community sort of gravitate to the forum. But if the community decided they would rather communicate on Reddit, then sort of that's where we would need to go. GitHub obviously also plays a huge part.
What kind of software do you use, or what kind of like tool for the forum?
So we use, in good fashion, open source community management forum software. And now, if I could remember the name.
But if you cannot remember now, you just send it to me afterwards, and we
Sure.
put it into the show notes.
I will do that. I will do that. It's something with D, I believe. But I think I'm confusing it with another product, so I'll look it up.
No worries. So now we already covered the one big growth channel for you, which is the open source community and all the ways you can leverage those people. So what other avenues of growth do you test right now, or did you already test?
So one thing that we have been we believe we have been quite successful with is offering content, more digestible content formats. Let's put it this way. So we used to have our training. That's a pretty serious commitment to.
Can you repeat the last? Can you start over again, because you were cut off for like 2-3 seconds?
Sorry. So
no worries.
So one thing that we've started to do is offer more sort of digestible content formats. We used to have, well, we still do have our product trainings, which, if you're serious about a product, are a great way to learn about it. But even the beginner training is a 5-day training. That's a pretty serious commitment that you need to sort of undertake. So it's not something you just try out. So what we've started a while back is doing webinars, and that's an hour. We see that there's always quite a few people registering to kind of get a feel for the product. So this is something that has worked quite well. Also, we have published much more content on our blog, on our website. Really, we always say we want to do help, not hype marketing. So, our blog articles are a serious read. These are like, big content pieces. But for somebody who has to solve a certain problem in their infrastructure, they're really helpful. And through that, we generate leads, we generate opportunities. So content has been one big part of things.
So I have a follow-up question there, Elias. So do you hide this content behind a wall, so you have to give up personal information like an email address, or is it optional?
That depends. So everything that's sort of on the blog and customer case studies and these kind of things, they're freely accessible, which of course also has to do with search engine relevance. If you hide things behind some kind of registration wall, then it doesn't help your search engine relevance, while free open content does. So that's one aspect of it. The webinars, for example, you need to register for. So it depends what type of content it is. And this evolves over time. So we have a few pieces of content in the works that will be sort of more meaty, more in the direction of ebooks and these kind of things. That will probably be behind some kind of registration form. Just because if you're willing to read a 30-page ebook on SNMP monitoring, which is a certain network monitoring thing.
I have no clue, but it sounds like interesting for people.
It's very technical, but if you're interested in a 30-page ebook on this is nothing you kind of snack away on. then you must have a serious interest in network monitoring. If not, you would never go through the pain of doing that. So that is, if somebody's that interested, then we might want to talk to this person.
And out of those things you mentioned, blog and webinar, what kind of learnings did you have over the past 12 months? Like what did work well, or also maybe didn't work so well?
So one thing that we've learned is you need to have sort of different depth of content, because then you can really start seeing sort of user journeys. So we have sort of an introduction webinar, which is very lightweight. You can follow it along. It demos the product. It's nice and shiny. And then sort of as a follow-up, we have a configuration webinar, which is very, very technical. Now it's a big difference if somebody just visits the first webinar and then sort of never shows up again, or if somebody registers for both webinars, because then that tells you quite a bit. So A, they're interested in the product. B, they're willing to invest not 1 hour, but 2 or 2.5 hours. But they're also technical, because the configuration webinar is very technical. So you start to learn about personas. This person seems to be somebody who has a technical role, not necessarily the decision maker, because they really want to things. I think we froze for a second.
Yeah, that is true.
There seems my kids are probably streaming downstairs.
No
What was
problem.
the last?
Just repeat.
What was the last?
So what I learned is basically that you said when someone attends like both webinars, the high like high level overview and then the technical one, you know that this is a technical person, and then you were cut off.
Yeah. So through these sort of content journeys, you start learning about the persona behind that email address. If somebody registers for both webinars, then reads 10 pages of the online documentation, then you can be pretty sure that that's the person actually working with the product. That's not the behavior of a decision maker. While a decision maker might be, doing the high-level webinar just to get a feel for the product, and then, spend some time on the pricing page, to learn, what would be the investment and these kind of things. So, looking at sort of journeys through your content is something that can be quite insightful. And it's something we're only sort of dipping our toe into the water. We're not super experts at that yet, but it already tells you quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible for webinars where people give away their information. It's not so easy for blogs, I assume.
True. I mean, obviously there's cookie technology. So once you've sort of set a cookie, you can see quite a bit. That's of course. But at some point, people need to actively give us, their email address or whatever, so that we can possibly track them. And it's an imperfect picture, but it educates even the subset of people that you can sort of watch. Is helpful to sort of also identify missing pieces, like say, okay, it would be great if we would have something, some kind of page that's really aimed at decision makers, because we don't have that yet, or just making up random stuff. But it allows you to kind of think about what's the journey that different personas will take until they ultimately talk to us or we talk to them.
So up to now, I heard like only inbound lead generation motions. Do you also plan to or already have like an outbound strategy?
So we have a strategy. We're not implementing, or we're at the very, very beginning of implementing this. So
okay.
We are experimenting with a few things, and what is something that we probably won't do unless maybe just to try it once is to do like pure cold calling or cold emailing, just random people, or random people that we believe are in our target group. Um, but there is sort of a nuance, you see, like if you use, for example, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, if you know, tweak the search a little bit, you can identify people that in their profiles write about working with CheckMK. Well, we throw that against our customer database and we see, hey, these guys aren't customers, so they must be using the raw edition. That's maybe somebody that I would like to talk to, just to find out, if they're happy. Oftentimes they might just have not followed what the enterprise edition offers, and they might be solving problems in complicated ways that the enterprise edition today solves for them, and the raw edition still doesn't. And then you have a conversation. So there are these kind of things. Then, we have a few competitors that, where we say, okay, we believe that we have a few differentiating factors against these competitors. Why not look at people that, are using these competitors and kind of poke them a little bit and say, hey guys, there's this thing that, the solution we've heard many people have a problem with. Actually, we have a good solution for that. But these are, very, very early days, where we're just trying out a few things. Right now, we still rely very much on some form of inbound, be it, content driven, be it recommendation driven, or be it, people wanting to upgrade from our open source product. These are sort of the three main channels in the inverse order, actually. So it's from the open source, that's the biggest. Second is recommendations and referrals. Third is sort of drawn in through content.
That's a nice place to be in, I must say. Yeah, if you have a good flow of inbound leads, your main problem is to qualify them in the correct way, I assume.
Yes. And we've gotten better at that over the last 1.5, 2 years. Definitely. It was a quick jitter.
No worries. That definitely was cut off then.
Yeah. So yes, it's definitely a nice place to be in, to be able to, sustain quite significant growth purely from inbound. Although the downside is, I always say we're only standing on one leg. And I'd like to be standing on two. It's just a lot more stable. And it's very hard to plan inbound. You can, you collect experiences over time, and then things, you can have a rough idea. But if you look beyond, okay, we have a pretty good picture of what will happen next month, but next year nobody could tell you. While with outbound, you can determine how many calls you will make. You can determine how many messages that you will send. And then it's about sort of tweaking the conversion rates and see, how to improve the conversion rates. But the principal input you can fully control. And that's the nice thing about outbound. And while this is why we will definitely augment our approach with that.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I mean, you take control of your own destiny. If you start outbound, and if you start it, it takes some time until you found the product person and framework fit that just fits to you and your target group. But once you have it, you build a machine, and that is beautiful. If you build that machine and you see it humming, that's amazing.
And it's also two things that I don't see as sort of distinct, because what you learn in your outbound approach about personas and who do I need to talk to, that will inform your inbound approach, because you will target the same personas. You will, those that you don't reach, you will at least try to get through the inbound channel, and vice versa. If you see something working really well on the inbound channel, then obviously, you'll take that into consideration, when you're thinking about who to call next.
Yeah, and the nice part for you is that in your outbound motion, you can always offer the open source product and say, hey, you don't have to pay anything, just try it out and check in later if they did. And so it's a low friction way of getting people on if they are the kind of people who want to do this.
Yes, so I mean, we offer a free trial of the enterprise product as well, which is sort of what we would naturally point them to. But sometimes, you know, it's also a good way to let people off the hook that you don't want to work with, you know, because not every customer is ideal. And, you know, it's totally okay if our sales reps say, hey guys, you know, with what the requirements you have, you're fine with the raw edition. Just use that, and you know you'll be fine. If you ever have a problem where you need the enterprise edition or you need enterprise support, then the whole price discussion goes away. Oh, could we have it for free or could we give a big discount? No, it's the enterprise product. It costs what it costs. But there's a great sort of product that you can have for free, and if you don't want to spend the money, and that's that has worked well.
What would you say, like, was your personal biggest learning building up, like also the sales team? Like you took over some people I know, but you also built or still building the sales team and build a lot of stuff that was not there before. And I would also assume that the culture somehow is different when you do like inbound to shifting it to outbound. So what are the biggest key learnings that you had up to now?
So the key learning, and that sort of then permeates into everything else, was that mid-market sales and enterprise sales are two completely different sports. I mean, completely different. It needs different people, different approaches, different everything. Um, so we always used to say, well, we do have enterprise customers. Yes, that is true. But these were customers that sort of grew over time, and suddenly they're spending enterprise tickets with us, but they were never like an enterprise sale to begin with. They started with spending 5,000 euros with us, and today it's 100,000 or more. But they started not with an enterprise ticket. Now, if you're going directly for the enterprise tickets, it's a whole different sport. And the first time we did this, I personally felt is like, I'm standing with my football and my foot on a basketball field, wondering where everybody's touching the ball with their hands, so to speak. That was sort of the image in my head. And this sort of learning then translates into everything. If you want to do enterprise sales on a regular basis and make this, a target group, you need people that can do this. You need people that can manage multiple threads. There's the commercial thread, the legal thread, the procurement thread, the, technical thread, all these sort of in the end need to tie together into the deal coming through. And not everybody can do that, and that's a very special skill set, and these people are probably not as good at high velocity sales, bringing in 50 new customers a month. But if they bring in one a month, then that is sort of, in terms of revenue, worth as much as 50 small ones maybe. And that informed of a lot of how I think of the evolution of the sales organization.
How do you find the right salespeople?
So we've had a bit of everything. We've worked with some recruiting firms and we've had good success there. We've had just people apply with us, and that has worked as well. We've had people from our network. If I'm honest, I don't think we have found the way yet. So we were working with one recruiting firm that has delivered good candidates, and where if they send somebody, we'll always take a look because we've had good experience with them in the past. We hired a recruiter about a year ago who's doing an awesome job, and he's really, really good. And he finds very good people as well, just through active sourcing on LinkedIn, on Xing for German-speaking roles. But then it's a lot of going through a lot of interviews and not being very picky. So sometimes there's yet another one, but I think it's worth it to go through 3 or 3 interviews more to find the right person rather than sort of settling.
How does your interview process look like?
So, and this goes for every role in our company, not only sales role. What we try to have like a sort of, in general, a 3-stage process. The first one is get to know the person, sort of, do the, screen their CV and kind of see, how they got to where they are today and where they want to go. The ideal outcome of that is they know the company that they're talking to, we know the person we're talking to, and we both believe that this could be something. And the second step is very much focused on their future role. So the developers will have two different technical interviews. The support engineers will have sort of mock-up support cases where they get a customer ticket and they need to resolve that. Salespeople, depending on their seniority and their role, will have some kind of sales case study that sort of builds up from who would you target, how would you approach them, now they're engaged, what's the next step? And then if you're talking about senior and enterprise salespeople, then you have a presentation part in there. You might have like a legal part where they say, okay, they want this contract clause, what is something that you would, how would you write this actually in a contract to reflect what you've discussed, these kind of things. So that's then very much about their skill set and what they their job actually will be. And then the third part is sort of culture and team fit, where we'll always have them meet parts of the team. These when we're doing physical interviews, these were like we would go to lunch together with parts of the team and the candidate and just have a nice lunch and chat, get to know them. And then there's an interview with usually our CEO and somebody else from the management team who hasn't seen them yet. These days where you can't go to lunch together, there's sort of a virtual coffee where people get together and just talk, get to know each other. And afterwards we ask the team, hey, what did you think of him or her? Can you imagine working with them? What was something that stood out positively or negatively? By that time, we're usually pretty sure that this will be a fit. So we've rarely had, oh, I really can't see myself working with them. But we sometimes had these, okay, this kind of was weird. Maybe we can dig into that in the last interview. And we've, said, after the third and last interview, no, sorry, this just doesn't work out. So it happens rarely because our screening process early on is pretty good, but it does happen.
I have one thing that worked really well for us, and I learned it from one of our advisors from the United States. What he's basically adopting is the Who method of hiring A players. And what I like most about this method, and we can link it in the show notes, is that you do reference calls. So you ask them, do you include them as well?
Yes, this is something that we typically do after the first stage, at least for people that are not fresh out of the university, because it's very hard. They don't have like a, so it's usually for people that are in their second job, and then now second or X, but second because plus, then you can call people from their first job. If they're in their first job, it's quite difficult. For salespeople, we actually also talk to customers. So we ask them, we ask them if they can provide us with a customer that we can call. This is something we've started recently. But if you get a glowing reference from a customer or a partner, in some cases, if you're talking about partner managers, then that's a very good indicator that it's not just their ex-boss trying to do them a favor, but it's somebody who spent money and worked with the person and still gives them a good reference. Then that's a pretty good indicator that they will. And sometimes after the technical interview, but that's usually for technical roles, we would ask, there's something that seems weird, where we might follow up with a former manager. So there's something that was just maybe due to nervousness, or is this really a skill set that they don't possess? When you have like let's say a senior developer and they get some very basic thing, they struggle with that, and that's odd. That shouldn't happen. And you can follow up, is this something that has to do with nervousness? Is this something that they're very have a very focused profile but don't know much else, these kind of things. But
Mhm.
that's the exception.
Mhm. In the interview with Greg Alexander, he mentioned that he also asked this question for salespeople, like, can you give me like a few references of former customers? And he says you already see directly if this is a good salesperson or not. The good ones say, yeah, sure, no problem. I can name you A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And the not so good ones say, I have to check. I have to come back to you. And then that's maybe a little hint here. I found it quite useful.
So my sample size of people where we've done this is too small to really have seen like these very distinct reactions. I think it also depends a bit on the geography. I think for sort of Anglo-Saxon salespeople, this is more natural. Again, just these references. Because in Germany, we have the Arbeitszeugnis, the reference letter, which, hey, I have a reference. Here it is, printed out. While that's much less typical in the English-speaking world. Where you might just have like a 3-line, yes, this person worked here. And then it's much more normal to do a reference call. So it's probably also a bit of a cultural, the geographic thing, how open people are to that.
Yeah, I must say it works wonders. We're also hiring some full-time positions now here at our company. And I mean, have reference calls with really interesting people, CEOs of companies with 4,000 employees plus. And they are really honest. They say, I know these are the strengths, these are the weaknesses, what will be the job? I think if you hire that person, you should look out for this, this, and this. So it's not about just sorting out. It's also about what should you look for when you hire that person? Do they need some support in certain areas? So yeah, it's quite interesting. I would always mix this in, always provide value, and it's quite, really quite insightful.
Yeah.
So Elias,
Yeah, and just kind of a last point on that, because if you think about it, like an interview typically takes, with prep work at least an hour. You do the preparation, you do the afterwards kind of writing on your notes, plus then the time of the interview. So you're easily, 1.5, 2 hours for one interview. A reference call takes you 15 minutes, 20
at
minutes
most,
at most, and it gives you so much information, that in terms of time investment, it's a no-brainer.
Absolutely, buy into that one. So we're already at the end of our session here, Elias. Let's wrap it up with our 5 questions. What do you do to keep body and mind fit and sharp?
Unfortunately, not enough right now. So the pandemic has hit my sort of, because I could walk to the pool from my office, so I was swimming in my lunch break, which was quite nice. But as you do, I dabble in triathlons, so I go running, I go cycling, and I hope that once it gets warmer, I can go back to swimming in the lake. I don't do enough of any of those, but at least I try to do it regularly, and then just some body weight exercises in between to not like become the doughboy over time. Because
Very good. What's your favorite business book?
There's a few that I really, really enjoyed. Two stand out. One is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. It's one that I've tremendously enjoyed, especially when I once started a company on my own. When I read that resonated very well with me. In terms of usefulness, it's especially if you're sort of early in your business career, I'd say it was Business Model Generation by Alexander Osterwalder. It's a brilliant book. It's so insightful, especially also if you, for example, want to teach teams that are not from a sort of have a business background, like technical teams, and you want to workshop with them on what's actually the business model behind a new product and these kind of things. Super useful book.
We put it in the show notes. Is there a business leader that you follow?
So it's hard to not follow Elon Musk because it's just all over the place. So I find him fascinating and somewhat scary. So I wouldn't say I'm a big fan, but I keep an eye on what he does. Um, there is one person who's no longer alive who I found very, very interesting is Alfred Herrhausen, who used to be the CEO of Deutsche Bank. And he was, in my opinion, a very foresightful, is that a word, person, where I think he foresaw many of the challenges that were coming to the German economy, to the world economy. Yeah, this is something, his biography is definitely worth reading. You can't follow him anymore because he's dead. But it's a very insightful biography.
Yeah, we also put it in the show notes. Who should be our next podcast guest and why?
That's a good question. So if you want to go a little bit away from sort of your traditional field of technology, sales, and marketing, I think, for example, what's his first name? Is it Hans-Joachim Watzke from Borussia Dortmund? I think would be a great guest because I think they've done an awesome job at sort of righting the ship and creating with sort of limited resources a really strong also business. So that would be somebody that would be definitely interesting to talk to. Yeah.
Okay, great. And now you can directly address our audience. Anything that we can help you with?
I mean, obviously, if you're into if you want to know what people what you can do in terms of keeping your IT up and running, then always do check us out. But more as a general ask, we see this so many times in our customer base, these really avoidable cybersecurity incidents that then create a huge mess. And so many of them are avoidable by using just if even free open source tools, and just giving the people the time especially, and sort of manpower to work on this. And it'll always pay off, this investment, because once things really do go wrong, it's so expensive to remedy them. So this is something that I would ask also everybody from the business world, is to kind of think about this perspective, because the investment has a much higher return on investment than you would have in anything you do on the sales and marketing side. Just because the costs of these incidents can be catastrophic for a business, and it's so much easier to avoid it than coming up with a super smart new sales strategy that will really move the needle. So this is something, do love your IT operations team, and let them do their job, and that's quite helpful.
Where can people get in touch with you, Elias?
So probably the best way is LinkedIn. It's actually the only social media platform I'm still active on. So just search for me there. I think there's not that many other people by my name. That's probably the best way.
So it's Elias, Elias, and then Völker, Voelker.
Exactly.
And we also put it into the show notes. So thank you very much, Elias. We are at the end of our show. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. Likewise, it was a pleasure. Sorry about the connection hiccups, but I guess you'll edit those out. As always, pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. And for everyone who's still listening to the show right now, please subscribe to it. And if you listen to it on Apple, please give us a great rating. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.